Hello, friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS Developer Interview Show. Today we're talking with Brian Gianforcaro. Hello, Brian.
Hello, Andres. How are you?
I am great. And how are you?
I am also great.
All right, intro done. So, you have been working on Serenity for quite a while, and I thought it would be great to get to know a bit more about you. So, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Brian. I'm a software developer. I happen to work at Microsoft right now. I've been working on Serenity probably since the end of 2019, or I think I saw one of your videos on lobsters, and I started watching, and then I got really interested when you kind of did the Hacker Man stuff, where the kind of first round of exploits were happening, and you were kind of building up some of these security mitigations and stuff. And I have worked on security relevant products in my career, and I find that kind of stuff interesting. So that kind of got me really excited. And I think the first interaction I actually had on the project was I left a review on a commit that you already made, and then I was like, "This is dumb," blah 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 blah, and then you're like, oh, "Okay, whatever." And but then I think the main thing I started contributing was Pledge and Unveil. You had just kind of added those to the system, so I kind of went through a bunch of utilities and kind of sprinkled that everywhere. And yeah, it was a great learning experience, kind of working over a bunch of different utilities and seeing how everything was put together, kind of. And it was kind of addictive, and I haven't really stopped ever since.
Cool. Yeah, I remember that when you started. It was so cool that we had this new mechanism, and it seemed like this huge task to go and apply it everywhere. And then you came along, and suddenly it was just everywhere. That was really sweet. So thank you for that. So how did you get into programming originally?
So I have an older brother. He's also a software developer. And my dad happened to be in a position where he could take a bunch of old hardware away from his work that was kind of being thrown away. And so he happened to pick up these two very old compact laptops. And this was maybe in 1995 or maybe earlier. So I wasn't a super geek, doing more of the older kind of computing stuff, but so that was kind of my first exposure, and my brother was learning C++ at the time. So I was probably 7 or 8, and I remember we went to our grandparents' house for a vacation or something, and my brother taught me Borland C++. And so the first program I ever wrote was printing out a boat using ASCII art, using cout in C++. That was my first kind of interaction with programming. I wasn't one of those people that immediately picked it up and was super passionate about it. I have in my early life, I struggled with programming a lot. I knew I wanted to do it. I was excited about it, but learning syntax and all that stuff, especially C++ for me as a very young person, was always confusing. And I knew a little bit of it, but writing a real program myself for building something was always kind of complicated. So maybe in my middle school teen time, I started working with Python, and I got some internships at the local college working on system software and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I started learning and kind of growing myself.
Yeah, that's funny. I can relate to that quite a bit. I also wanted to start with C++ early, but I found it really hard to engage with because I was too young and didn't understand low-level concepts. So luckily, you eventually find one of those higher-level languages, and you get sort of a way to engage with programming in a way that you can actually handle. So Python sounds like it was your gateway.
Yeah.
And
I also think having an IDE kind of hurts you in the very beginning, right? I'm one of those people that I kind of have to understand the whole picture to really understand something. I need to be able to go to over here and see how that thing works for me to kind of build the whole picture. So I think in Borland C++, for example, I didn't know how to navigate anything. I just knew how to write code, right? So having all that stuff hidden behind and not being forced to go oh, this header is over here, I can go read that full header and know where everything is, kind of thing. That kind of hurt me, and I've kind of kept that mentality throughout my career that I don't want to use things that hide things from me, at least in the beginning, right? I want to understand everything.
Totally, yeah. And I think that remains great advice for beginners also. to like don't start with an IDE because you're just hiding stuff that you need to learn. And I think you've ended up in the right project here for that type of mentality.
Yeah.
So I guess let's talk about Serenity. So you already talked about how you got started with the security videos. I didn't actually realize that's the thing that brought you to us. So what's something else that you worked on in Serenity that you're really happy with?
I think one of the big things I've been working on recently has been like surfacing of errors in the kernel. So Serenity was built with this kind of awesome mentality where we have AK, that's kind of shared library, can be used in user space and in the kernel. But unfortunately, the kernel does have kind of some different design constraints and requirements that a normal user mode application doesn't have, right? So I've been kind of peeling back that onion a little bit and trying to remove some of those patterns that might be useful in user space but are kind of potentially dangerous or maybe make the system not so reliable in kernel mode. So things like string allocation, where we have these like very nice string APIs for user mode, but unfortunately they can kind of hide failure and they kind of just crash very easily if something happens like out of memory in the kernel. And so kind of just plumbing that whole error pattern through the kernel has been something I've been working on kind of over the last few months. And we made some progress, but there's still a lot to do. But yeah, I think that kind of error propagation is like a weird obsession of mine. Like I was like really passionate about adding no discard everywhere. Like I love no discard. It makes me so happy. For some reason, I'm like very paranoid about somebody forgetting to check error result and then there being some bug or like some catastrophic thing happening. That's like my nightmare for some reason. But
yeah, I think since you started doing that, you really changed everybody's mind about how these things should work. And I feel like as a project, we've become way more paranoid about stuff like no discard and error propagation. And it's all for the better, right? It's really, really pleasing. And I'm actually thinking lately, like, why don't we bring this mentality into user space as well? What do you think about something like that? So there are, of course, like you say, different design constraints in user space, but do you think this would make sense to be more careful about error propagation?
I think personally, yes. I mean, I know this is like kind of like a classical like Unix hacker debate or like whatever, like where people claim there's no way to test out of memory, like there's no way to actually handle out of memory in a normal user space program, right? Like for one error kind of category. But I mean, I work on a database full time, like a database engine, and we have to keep the database up, right? And we've managed to figure out ways to handle error out of memory errors in user mode for our database, and we had done that for 20 plus years, right? And we have a very reliable product. So I kind of take the polar opposite view of some people that say you can't, but I understand where they're coming from. It's very hard. It's hard to test for all those kind of corner cases, and so you can think that you're doing a good job, but when it comes to actually that error happening, you do a very bad job and you fail with some other kind of unknown failure condition. But I think it's a valiant effort and I think it's worth it. And I think it would certainly make using AK across the system a lot more uniform, right? If you don't have these special cases for kernel mode versus user mode, it's a lot easier to kind of see a pattern, apply it anywhere. And so it makes the kernel more accessible to other people and that kind of thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually something, that's like the one downside I've seen of taking the kernel in this new direction where we're more paranoid about errors, is that there's this growing divergence between user mode use of AK and kernel mode use. So bringing those back together would be pretty cool. But just out of curiosity, like what are some high-level strategies for making this type of work bearable in user mode? Because you mentioned a database engine, which is like a pretty narrow domain after all. Like, can you take those same things and apply them in any GUI application?
So like one of the core things that we do at my job is we do this thing called stack hashing. And so you essentially, when you run a program, like it's very easy for database. It would probably be a lot harder for a kernel or for a user mode application. But our strategy, and I think it's used in Windows a lot as well, in the Windows kernel, and it's probably where we got it from. But you essentially run a command to the database. So you like start up the database, get it to a steady state, and then you run a command inside the database. And then the system knows to retry that command until it doesn't hit an error anymore. And so, or the test harness knows. And so the system inside, it tracks every single allocation. and every single free. And it maintains a stack database on disk. And so it will know to instrument every allocation with failure if it hasn't seen that stack before, that unique stack. And so you can kind of test the whole system through and know that every single place you allocate, for example, handles allocation successfully. It doesn't crash. It doesn't put the system in a bad state, that kind of thing. And so there are ways to kind of test the system and kind of instrument it so you can validate these assumptions. But they are kind of very complicated and maybe domain specific. Like, I don't know if you could do that with a GUI app very easily.
Yeah, I don't know either. That sounds like an interesting area to explore, and we are in a great position to explore these types of ideas, right? And ideally, we would find some kind of compile time pattern that allows us to express this in statically. Anyway, this is just an area where I think you really changed my mind about error propagation. So I'm really grateful for that, actually. Because I started out with exactly this mindset you described, right? Like I was the guy who would say, "Oh, who cares about in user space? We can just crash." But it's kind of cool not to crash. So changing your mind is good. Anyway, so other stuff about Serenity. So, like, what's something that you haven't done with Serenity that you would like to do?
One thing that I've really been excited about for a long time, and I think it was the first issue that I actually created in Serenity, was that we should have syscaller enabled for Serenity. So syscaller is a system call fuzzer that Google developed, and it's really cool because instead of like being like a dumb fuzzer where like just tries different system calls with different arguments, kind of like, not to say that the one that Ben developed is dumb, but it's kind of very simple-minded, right? It finds a ton of bugs. It's awesome, but I think it could find way more bugs, right? So syscaller knows, like, I can use this API to open this kind of file descriptor, and then it knows that these syscalls will take this kind of file descriptor, so it can use that information to test that we get the expected kind of error classes from the syscalls that the file descriptor doesn't work with, and then it can pass it and expect valid syscall operations through the syscalls that it is compatible with. And so you can kind of explore a whole bunch of pathways that a dumb fuzzer wouldn't be able to kind of go down. And it does it using instrumentation via binary instrumentation for coverage. So we actually have kcov support already. I forget the person's alias, but there's an awesome person that has been kind of like working on these things in the background with like me cheering behind them. But so that we have kcov support inside Serenity kernel already, right? So theoretically, and they actually have a branch where they have syscaller working against Serenity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have a fork of syscaller, and it's kind of like a couple last minute steps, kind of packaging it, getting it set up as a port, and then getting it set up to run inside OSS fuzz as like a continuous thing. And if we could get those kind of pieces together, I think we could like find many exploits, right, or vulnerabilities in the kernel that I think would be really exciting.
Yeah, that seems extremely likely. So that was your first bug, huh? Okay.
Yeah, I think that I was like super like, why don't you guys have this yet? I mean, it was kind of a typical outside person being like, you should do this thing, kind of.
Yep. It's funny how things change. But yeah, that sounds like it would be awesome to get around to that and get that actually integrated, because we have a huge number of fuzzers running, but I do kind of feel like we're not getting as much value out of fuzzing as we could, right? And also other forms of static analysis. And I know that you're a big fan of static analysis in particular because you've been adding lots of it to Serenity. So how do you think that we're doing with that stuff so far? And do you have any ideas for how we can do better?
Yeah, I think static analysis is kind of like a sensitive subject for a lot of people because a lot of people have a bit of a preconceived notion about it, about how useful it is and how noisy it is and that kind of thing. I kind of try to take a more pragmatic view of like, it's a tool. You have to kind of hone the tool to your use case always. So you're going to have false positives. A lot of the things you think are false positives may not be false positives. Like I've seen plenty of cases where a static analysis system flagged somebody who knew the code base very well said, "Oh, that's not possible. That's not a real thing," and then they close the bug, and then they get a CVE or something, right? Years later, where that thing was actually caught, right? So I think it's kind of a problem with people's assumptions and also the reporting of static analysis. I mean, I admit that a lot of these tools can be very opaque in their messaging and how they try to tell you where things are, and kind of it's a difficult problem, I think, in general, but there's a lot of work that can be done to improve them. But yeah, I'm excited about static analysis. I think it is one of those things that's just required for a large project, because no matter how many eyes you have, there's always going to be some person who's not familiar with the patterns of the system or something, right, that these things slip in. So I like having these automated tools in the background watching our backs for us. And I think if we put in the right amount of effort, they give a lot back. With Serenity so far, I think people have been pretty receptive to like SonarQube, for example. So we set that up. It's running every night. I see people occasionally complaining about it, like what is this talking about, right? Like what is this weird thing that it's saying is happening? So at least people are looking at the data. I think that's encouraging. It is very, very noisy. I've worked on like kind of suppressing a whole bunch of different classes of like what they call code smells, which are kind of like normal C++ like STL patterns that we don't really care about in Serenity or may not match our coding style or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
So it's very opinionated, unfortunately. It kind of is, it doesn't let you opt into things. It kind of gives you a bunch of defaults and then you have to opt out. So I think that's a lot of the feedback that people have given so far, is that it's super noisy, like we need to fix this. So that's what I've been trying to work on, is kind of disabling those very noisy rules and kind of letting the valuable stuff come up. And yeah, it's found maybe a handful of like real like missing initialization bugs or memory corruptions. I think Brendan found one case in the kernel in the networking stack where we had like a real memory corruption, and he was able to actually trigger it using an outside fuzzer. So yeah, it finds real stuff. But yeah, I think honing those tools, exposing, and that's the other thing, is like one static analysis system is never enough, right? You need to run like pretty much everyone you can find. So we run SonarQube right now. We run PVS Studio as well. And then I'm trying to get CodeQL back on the branch. So we were running CodeQL a long time ago, but we were running it in the PR workflow, which kind of exacerbated the PR time. So we rightfully ripped it out. But I think running it in the background now that we have these kind of this pattern of like background actions that happen once a day or something, I think getting that back in would be good. Yep.
Yeah, I think we've settled on a really good workflow. And I totally agree that like you need these things to watch your back for you. And thankfully, it's really easy to stack them, right? Like it's like almost like set it and forget it. Especially if they're cloud-based, because then they sort of update automatically, and if they add new bugs that they learn how to discover, then we just get that for free. One thing that I found a little bit surprising about Sonar Cloud, I think it was, that when we originally set it up, they only found 4 security vulnerabilities across like 500,000 lines of code. I had a hard time believing that. So I wonder if we are particularly opaque to static analysis because, as you say, like we don't use typical STL patterns. And do you know if there's a way that we could expose integration points better or something like that, or teach the static analysis about us in a way that would help catch more bugs?
I think unfortunately every system is different, and I think one of the main kind of drawbacks to us being on like the bleeding edge of the language is that a lot of these parsers are kind of behind, right? So they'll support C++ 17 or something, right? But we kind of have all these new patterns and new language features that we kind of very quickly adopt into AK, so they kind of bleed everywhere. And so there are kind of some, like I think for PVS Studio, there was one file in like the users in libweb that crashes the static analysis system. So we essentially had to like comment out that file or like disable it for the static analysis. And Coverity has the same problem where their parser is like really old. It doesn't understand anything. So I like hacked up a whole tree trying to get stuff to work, and I kind of barely limped along and was able to analyze maybe like 75% of the project. So waiting for those tools, I guess, to come move forward and make progress on the parsers is kind of something we just have to do. And but I think Coverity does have a nice system where you can kind of add a header file or some mechanisms to tell the static analysis, give it more information about patterns, or like, don't worry about this case with this certain macro. You can use it to instrument things. I haven't seen anything like that for SonarQube, and I haven't seen anything like that for PBS Studio. Maybe I haven't looked close enough, but maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll learn more about these things as we move along, but it is really curious that we do stay on the bleeding edge of C++. I don't know that there's any project of similar scope that does. It would be slightly crazy to do this in a more commercial project.
Yeah.
But I guess that's probably going to work. Although it does make you wonder if it's even feasible to have this sort of workflow, because if we're always going to integrate the latest features when they come along, maybe we'll always be that project that crashes the static analyzer. But I guess we'll find out. Anyway. Yeah. So back to just straight Serenity stuff. I often tell people about my personal goals for Serenity, which are just to build an operating system that I want to use. And I'm really always curious about other people, because everybody has their own goals for it. So what are your personal goals for the SerenityOS project?
I think when I first started, I was kind of on like the self-host train, where I was really excited about self-hosting, even if that meant like running in a VM or whatever, like being able to build a system inside the system. Over time, I've kind of decided not to care. Like, I don't know. I think it's kind of like the typical new person in Serenity gets excited, thinks about these things you could do, and then I don't know. I stay for like the community and the fun of hacking on the project. Like, I kind of gave up having goals and like having any dreams, because ultimately, I don't know. So I find it very hard to like work on something without having like a passion for it or something, right? I choose my projects very specifically, and so getting caught up in that kind of thing is very common for me. But I felt it a very different and pleasing feeling to kind of just let that all go and just kind of do it purely for the fun, not really worry about at all where it's going to go. And I think I had a better time when I did that. So I don't have any real aspirations, really. I hope the system becomes more reliable. I hope we have fun building it, and I like all the features. But yeah, I don't really want to have goals, unfortunately.
No, that's kick-ass.
I think I've become enlightened by your mindset, and I think it's really been for the better. Yeah.
Cool. So you mentioned like the typical person, the newcomer to Serenity, and this phases that they go through where they want to get self-hosting going. They want to build a package manager and all those things. How do you think the project is doing at integrating new people who become curious about participating?
I think there's like enough people, and everybody, we kind of built this kind of shared mindset where like no matter who jumps in the Discord, there's like somebody probably there around that time, and they normally kind of give them the spiel, right? Like they kind of try to immediately course correct and try to like, set expectations. So I think it's like a very healthy community that you built. I think is dealing with it, that growth kind of well so far. It is kind of like a eternal problem, I guess, right? Where like this project is very different than 99% of other projects in the world, right? So people are always going to come in with these conceptions, and there's like nothing you can do about it, really. Given like all your like office hours, everybody every single time tries to like get a plan out of you, and you have to make your same joke 1,000 times, right? Like, and you've tried every means possible to avoid that, right? But it still happens. So I guess that's just the fate that we're dealt, and we have to deal with it. But I think we're doing a good job of dealing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've been around for quite a while, as we talked about, and you were with us when we were on IRC, and then we ended up moving to Discord. And it's a move that some people find controversial. I was wondering what you thought about that, how that's been working out for us.
Personally, for me, it's been nice because I know you can run IRC like on a bouncer or you can run it on your phone or whatever. But whenever I tried to do that stuff, I never really engaged with the communities that I was joined on. But the Serenity mobile experience makes it a lot easier to like, I don't know, just check in from like you just woke up and you're being lazy or something on a Saturday and you want to see what people are up to. And you can just kind of jump in and see what's going on. Maybe not the healthiest lifestyle, but it's at least nice where I can kind of stay in touch with the community wherever I am. If I have some spare time, I'm sitting in like a parking lot waiting for my girlfriend or something, right? I can go see what people are up to and kind of plan. Oh, I can go work on this later with you or something, right? Like I like the video and the audio. We haven't kind of fell off using those, I guess, as a community, like where people aren't really joining the voice chats anymore, or as much as they were in the beginning. But I think it's a cool feature. And it's valuable to have as kind of like a thing and I've used it before to like kind of pair program with somebody. There was somebody that kind of reached out to me and said, hey, I want to work on like the Serenity kernel. Can you kind of teach me how it works? And so, yeah, we jumped on a call on the voice chat and I was kind of able to kind of give them a little tour of like how the things I work on and like the subsystems I know about and how they work and give them an overview. And I think it was a valuable experience. So I think I like having those tools. I do think that Discord does have some unfortunate things where like people that need to remain anonymous, that kind of thing, it's harder for them to interact with Discord, so you kind of restrict your community in some sense. But I think all tools have constraints at some point, right? So it's hard to find like a perfect solution for everybody.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm pretty happy with how it's developed because I really only realized in retrospect just how constrained we were by the IRC format, right?
Yeah.
It just wouldn't be possible to have the scale of discussion that we have these days, and like all these parallel threads going on, right? So
yeah. Also, like the rich content has kind of like elevated the community, right? Like memeing in the way that we do now wouldn't have been possible in IRC. It would have been very complicated, right?
True. Yeah.
Like all the emojis, all of the rich text, and like even like viewing code inside Discord is awesome, right? Like you can just kind of paste stuff and it gets formatted nicely and everything. Yeah.
All right. So anyway, I don't know why I asked about this. Some other questions I got for you. I wanted to ask, what do you think makes great software?
Sure. I think the people that build it are very important, right? So having that diversity of thought of, like for example, in AK, we have all these different people that kind of have helped shape the design and brought their own perspective and kind of made it this better, bigger thing. It's really nice to use, and it's kind of different than most other STL kind of libraries or C++ libraries, but it brings in a bunch of inspiration from all of them. So yeah, people are important. I think also consistency and kind of having a uniform vision for the project is important, which you've done successfully for Serenity, where we have kind of one pattern to do error handling. We have a pattern for formatting strings, and we kind of like are sticking to these core patterns, and it's easy for somebody new to come in and do the correct thing and not mess up kind of thing. And so I think that helps build robust software. And then, yeah, being passionate, testing the software thoroughly. I mean, we've done a relatively good job, I think, of testing Serenity so far. Andrew Castor and a bunch of people have kind of helped build out this test suite, which runs on every PR and has found regressions, and we've been able to kind of track those over time, which is great. I think there's still a lot to do, where it's kind of has grown very organically so far, like most things in Serenity. But yeah, I think we're doing a good job so far, and Serenity is a good example of kind of building robust software. I mean, we could be more robust and we can always improve, but I think we're, given the scale of the project and the free time of the people working on it, I think we're doing a good job so far.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think we should, what can we do to improve our process to sort of become even better?
I don't know. I mean, I think we have relatively good code reviews. Like the code reviews I see on the project are normally pretty thorough. I think the hardest part is you have these kind of corners where like somebody kind of went and built out something only they really know how it works, and then somebody new comes and tries to contribute to that, and then we don't really have a reviewer for that, right? So like the maintainers can try to look and see if they see anything wrong or something, right? But it's very different than somebody that has knowledge of that specific problem domain or that project, part of the project, right? Actually giving you a real thorough review. So again, having like common code and a shared style obviously helps with that. But sometimes you just need that person. So I think having more community-based reviews, like people coming out of like kind of stewarding the things that they've helped build, is important for a project of this size, right? Because you can never have too many you can't have too many reviewers on a single PR, I guess. But for the whole system, you can never have too many reviewers, I guess, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. Like these areas where somebody went and built something, and they're the only person who knows how that works. Do you think that there's a sort of a systematic way to avoid accumulating things like that? By saying,
I don't think so.
yeah, I don't know either. Like, I wonder if you would ask people to integrate the thing that they're building with the rest of the system in some meaningful way, so that it has sort of a transition point into other parts of the system. Because if something is completely siloed, it can be really hard to approach, right? But if it's integrated with some GUI application or something like that, then you have, I don't know, like maybe an entry point that feels more familiar. But
Sure. Yeah.
It always comes back to this thing where I don't want to tell anybody what to do ever. So
Yeah.
that really feels like our biggest constraint in terms of like people management in this project. Like at the end of the day, it's just people doing what they like, and we get what we get.
Yeah.
Wow.
I did have kind of like one of my very first experiences in Serenity, that after I did the unveil and pledge thing, I remembered I wanted to build this feature where I think Sergey had just built the help system. And I was like, ooh, this is really cool. I want to build a button. And when I click that button, it'll take you to the GitHub editor for that man page that you had just, and it was like I had done the worst thing in the world. Everybody hated my PR. And they were like, no, we cannot do this. This is terrible. This is not the Serenity way. But it was kind of one of those first times that I felt the pushback of the community, right? And like, not that it was bad, but it was just, now I think it was a good idea, right? I do think it was a bad change, and not bad, but like didn't fit the design and the goals of the system. But I think having that kind of relationship where you can tell people, no, this doesn't really match our overall goals, like of the goals we have, right? Like the design of the system, but still giving them the freedom to do whatever they want, kind of like for building out things that do fit. I think it's very healthy for the project. Yeah.
Yeah, for real. And it's always tricky with that kind of thing to figure out what to say no to, because you don't want to stifle people's creativity, but obviously you can't say yes to everything. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like we are on track, like, to stay true to the original vision of the system, sort of as it was when you first discovered it, or do you think that we've changed since then?
I think it's pretty similar to the original kind of goals that I saw back then. I think you've done a good job of kind of holding true to those. Like, personally, for me, I think given the amount of code we have and the amount of like features and stuff, if I was in your position, I would be very tempted to like make the UI very modern, right? And like make it like look like every other modern system, just because that's what I deal with every day and that's kind of what I'm used to. But I think you've done a good job of kind of like holding on to these core values that you wanted from the beginning of the system, right? And keeping true to those. So yeah, I don't think we veered off too far.
Yeah, fair enough. Although I have to say that like it's not really just me enforcing these values anymore. I've just
yeah, that's true.
I've nagged them into people enough that now they just self-propagate.
Yeah,
which is really the only way to scale that kind of thing.
Yeah,
because I at least I personally find it kind of difficult to tell people no. It always feels like you have to put a lot of effort into doing it in a good way. So The more you can sort of distribute that kind of work, the better.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so final question. When you approach learning something new that you just don't know how to do, how do you do that?
So I like envy you and your style, like watching you in a video at least a lot. I can't do what you do, where you like jump in and you just kind of figure something out. I'm much more of like I said in the beginning, I have to understand like a really big picture to really be able to kind of think through some problem. So I am kind of one of those people that maybe builds a small prototype or like hacks something up to try to get something working, and then iterates on like one small section for a long time and kind of develop the idea and my vision. And then once I have that, then I can kind of move out to a bigger thing. But yeah, I can't really kind of do your rapid prototyping, like sketch out a system and then fill it in like in an hour or something, right? It takes me hours or days, right, to do something like that. So yeah, I kind of have to get that big picture and dig into all the details or go find examples or something. I don't know why I'm like that, but that's just how I am.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different, right? And I think you have an eye for these details that I just gloss over. And I would imagine that that probably holds you back from being able to cowboy architecture or something like I do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's been something over my career that has definitely, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, it's been super interesting getting to know more about you, Brian. I'm really grateful that you agreed to do the interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Before we go, is there anything that you want to plug now that you have the opportunity? No Instagram, I guess TikTok?
Not that you guys should see. I have a Twitter, BGIANFO on Twitter. That's about it.
Cool. Well, everybody please follow Brian on Twitter for spicy takes. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.